Okay, right off the bat, I did really like this show, but to me, it was kind of disappointing. And what I mean by that is, I thought the first three episodes of the show were genuinely fantastic. They were incredible comic book content. They were just incredible episodes of television. I thought the filmmaking was fresh and fun and unique. And also, the Muslim representation in the MCU was really well done. I love Kamala Khan and her entire family. I think that whole dynamic is so beautiful and so well written. The only reason why I say the show is disappointing is that the last three episodes were fine, but they just weren't up to the same caliber as those first three episodes. Those first three episodes genuinely warmed my heart, and they were just really well done. For me, one of the shining highlights of the show was Iman Vellani as Kamala Khan. She's genuinely fantastic in the role. I really like the character of Kamala Khan in the comics, and I haven't played that Avengers video game, but I've seen like the first like 10-15 minutes. I've seen the opening cutscene of the Avengers Day celebration thing. And I really like the character of Kamala Khan, and I think Iman Vellani did a fantastic job at bringing her to life. And I think the show also does a really good job at capturing Kamala's family dynamics very nicely, particularly the relationship between her and her dad. Whenever her and her dad had to interact in the show, it was just incredibly heartwarming and fulfilling, especially in the last episode where he gives her the name of Ms. Marvel. I thought that scene was genuinely sweet and fantastic, though it is kind of corny. But I think the amount of emotion and heart that went into that scene kind of outweighs the corniness because, I mean, of course her name means Ms. Marvel, but even still, I really liked the dynamic between Kamala and her family, her dad in particular, because to me that's always been the strongest part of the Kamala Khan character. I also just love the fact that Iman Vellani is a massive Marvel fan, and she's constantly like having fights with Kevin Feige. I mean, they're like joke fights, but I love the fact that she keeps challenging Kevin Feige on the MCU designation of 616 that they established in Doctor Strange, and she's just like, no, the MCU in the comics is Earth 19999, and the MCU should be that, and Kevin's just like, nah, 616. I think that stuff is really fun, and I love how she is just a fan of Marvel Comics in general, and for the most part, her takes on comic book material is actually quite accurate most of the time. I thought the character of her best friend Bruno was also really good. I really enjoyed the actor in the role, and I love the fact that Bruno dresses like Marty McFly. I think that is such a cool detail. Like, it's so like dorky and nerdy, but I love it, and I love that that's just how he dresses in the show. Also, Bruno being her best friend and secretly in love with her, well, not so secretly, it's kind of obvious, but she just can't see it, but I really want the two of them to end up together because Bruno just fits her more. I know in the show she seems to like come around a little bit more, but it's like, no, Kamala, you have to pick Bruno because he is just the right person for you and he's there for you and his, your family loves him. Like, it just makes sense. Come on, Kamala, see sense. Speaking of Kamran, I think he was fine. In fact, the character reminded me a lot of, is it Geldof? It's that character from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. You know, in that arc when Spider-Man first meets the X-Men, there's like this kid at his school who has like mutant powers and is like blowing up cars and all that. And you kind of find out that like, he's kind of like a tool at the end of the day. Kamran kind of reminded me of that character in a way where, like, Kamran is not as much of a douche as Geldof is in the Ultimate Comics, but it's like, he's not, like, a super great guy. Like, he's nice enough, but it's like, there's something off with him. I don't know. Maybe this is just my bias for Bruno coming in and the fact that I want Kamala and Bruno to be together or something. But, like, by the end of the show, when Kamran has, like, a bit of Kamala's power, he has, like, that clandestine power in him now, and he's kind of, like, blowing up things accidentally because he can't control it. It's setting up that he's going to be, like, an antagonist or, like, a villain for Season 2 or something. But, if there is a Season 2. But it's that thing of, like, Kamran was a fine character, I prefer Bruno. And I think the overall story for Season 1 is nice. It is obviously the superhero origin story. We've seen it before. The person gets powers, they learn with great power comes great responsibility, blah, 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 blah. They test their powers, they make mistakes, they gain the trust of the people, but then the government interferes. And like, we've seen it all before. And the show does a good job at doing all of that. There are a couple of moments where I'm like, yeah, this is just the cliche. I thought the finale was kind of weak, where it was just Kamala fighting government agents and drones. In fact, the government agents wielded these sonic guns, and I was like, is this an intentional reference to Spider-Man the Animated Series? Because in Spider-Man the Animated Series, the 90s cartoon, they couldn't use actual guns, so they used like laser or sonic guns, and that reminded me a lot of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, so I don't know if that was intentional or not. It probably might have been. But I mean, the overall narrative was fine. I do think episode 5 was quite interesting, how it was Kamala stuck in the past and we learned the backstory of her great-grandparents, and how basically Kamala was the one that was able to reunite her grandmother and her great-grandfather together because she used her Marvel powers in the past. It gets all timey-wimey, time travel-y, and all that kind of stuff. But I liked that sort of connection, how Kamala has always been connected to her great-grandmother and her grandmother too. Again, the family dynamics in the show are so really well thought out and really well done, and they just felt tangible and believable. The relationship between Kamala and her mother is also very nice and tender. I love that Kamala's mother makes Kamala the Ms. Marvel costume, which I think looks really great, and I hate the fact that they only used it for one episode. Like, that was so stupid to me. I was like, you have this really great looking costume that is going to get replaced in Captain Marvel 2, and you don't let Kamala wear her actual costume for like more than one episode. I also liked a lot of the little side characters too. The Sheikh / Imam of the mosque was such a cool character. He was such a humble, nice guy, and you could just tell that he was genuine and sincere and just cared about his community when he sits down with Kamala and essentially gives her the "with great power comes great responsibility" speech. It's so heartwarming and nice, and he's just such a nice, warm presence. I loved the Muslim representation in this show. Like, I've talked about this before, representation does matter in some ways, but it's not the be-all and end-all of a show. Like, again, if you watch this show and you're not a Muslim, you can enjoy it because it is a nice, heartwarming show, regardless of the fact that there is Pakistani culture, there is Muslim culture embedded in this show. Like, I can watch Marvel's Daredevil and be absolutely enthralled with the dialogue scenes between Matt Murdock and Father Lantom, because whilst they are dealing with Catholicism and Catholic ideas, I don't care, because the universal truths and good and evil that they talk about all the time are universal and applicable. They're just so enthralling to watch because it is just good, well-written dialogue, and Ms. Marvel has very similar things to that. Granted, it is not on the same level as the masterpiece that is Marvel's Daredevil, but still. I also thought the filmmaking in those first 3 episodes were really strong. The directors of Bad Boys for Life directed the first episode, and I think they directed the finale as well. The finale wasn't as well put together as the first episode, because the first episode, it was almost like if Edgar Wright genuinely did direct an MCU film. I mean, obviously he was supposed to direct Ant-Man, but, you know, things fell apart. But Episode 1 of Ms. Marvel genuinely felt like Edgar Wright had arrived in the MCU, was bringing his Baby Driver energy, and shot an MCU project, because the way it was shot, the way it was directed, it just felt so incredibly stylistic and full of character, and I was like, finally, this is something the MCU has been missing for so long. Granted, the show does fall into the MCU traps of, oh yeah, big drone fights or big, you know, laser energy beam stuff in the finale, but just the energy and the creative filmmaking that was in those first 3 episodes were really good to me. The thing about Kamala Khan that I love is that she is essentially us. She is essentially the fandom. She is the fan base. In many ways, when a lot of nerds go, oh yeah, if I was to be a comic book character, I'd be Peter Parker. No, realistically, we would all be Kamala Khan. Because in many ways, Kamala Khan is just me, but a female version. Although her favorite superhero is Captain Marvel, and I will never understand that. In fact, the way the show kind of justifies Captain Marvel being Kamala's favorite is kind of funny, because it's just Kamala going, Captain Marvel is like so powerful, and like she's just so cool and awesome, and it's like, oh, okay. I think for me, despite the fact that there are djinns and clandestines and superpowers, the most unrealistic thing is that Kamala Khan's favorite superhero is Captain Marvel. But also, the moment in episode 1 that genuinely made me fall in love with the show was the scene where Kamala's parents go into her room and they're just like, Kamala, we won't let you go to Avengers Con alone, but if you go with your dad and you go as Big Hulk and Little Hulk, that whole scene was so cute. I love that they you know, they didn't understand their daughter's passion for this kind of stuff, but they knew that it was important to her, so they at least attempted to do something. And then Kamala was just like, oh, you guys are so lame. And she immediately regretted it. You could tell in her face she regretted it. And the heartache that was on their face was genuinely sad. And it was just such a good and powerful moment because you're just like, Kamala knew they meant well, but also as a fan of this material, she was cringing on the inside because, like, that's a relatable thing. That's a thing I do, like, all the time. Like, whenever I'm out and about and someone references something that I like, but they reference it poorly, and it's just like, the heart was there, but it was also kind of cringy, and it's just like, why did you do that? Like, the real strength of Ms. Marvel is the character dynamics. The story itself is fine, but the show to me was at its strongest when it was just dealing with Kamala, her day-to-day life at high school, and her family drama. When the show got a bit bigger and brought in damage control and these drones, it was kind of like, that's not where the show was thriving. The show was thriving because it was small and intimate and character driven. In many ways, I kind of wish this was a film, just because not only was the filmmaking quite good in those first 3 episodes, but also the story they told here I think just didn't necessarily justify a 6-episode miniseries. Because the most that happens is that Kamala Khan gets the bracelet, finds out that she is like part jinn or something. She goes to Pakistan, meets up with like the clandestines and this other group that is like the faction that like goes against the clandestines. She travels back in time and helps reunite her grandmother with her great-grandfather, and that's kind of it. Like, she goes back and then deals with like the damage control drones, and everyone realizes, oh yeah, Ms. Marvel is the new superhero. That's kind of it. Like, you could have told this in like a 2-hour 20-minute film. But one of the things I found funny about the first 3 episodes of this show was that it felt more like a Spider-Man thing than most of the MCU Spider-Man films. Like, Homecoming is a good Spider-Man film. I will defend that film with my life. I think it is a good Spider-Man film. But for some odd reason, Ms. Marvel just felt more authentic and more emotional and more genuine than Spider-Man Homecoming did. And then obviously Far From Home is a whole other can of worms that I don't really want to open, just because it will lead me on like a massive rabbit hole where I just rant about that film, just because as a Spider-Man fan, I think Far From Home is just infuriating. And then No Way Home obviously doesn't really deal with the high school stuff that much. Like, it does at like the beginning for like a couple of minutes, but realistically, No Way Home is built upon the foundation of bringing back the old villains and Toby and Andrew. And look, whilst I think the filmmaking of the last 3 episodes weren't up to par with the first 3 episodes, I still think the show overall is good, and I enjoyed it. And I really like the fact that Kamala Khan now exists in the MCU and is a character that they can use, because I think Iman Vellani is great, I think the character is great, and I think the character will be a real benefit towards Captain Marvel 2, or The Marvels, whatever they changed it to, just because I didn't like the first Captain Marvel. I liked Monica Rambeau in WandaVision, except for the fact that they make her stupid by the end by forgiving Wanda, but I liked the altruistic nature of that character for the most part, and I am very hit and miss on Brie Larson as Captain Marvel because I didn't like her in her own film, but I liked her a lot in Avengers Endgame, so The Marvels is going to be an interesting film because realistically I'm showing up because Iman Vellani as Ms. Marvel is there, but also I do want to see what they do with Monica and Carol Danvers in particular, because I mean, they kind of have to sell us on Carol Danvers as a character, because in Captain Marvel 1, she doesn't really have a character, and then in Endgame, she's kind of just there, and is powerful, and is cool enough, but I'm not super invested in that character. Oh yeah, and they also changed the fact that Kamala Khan isn't an Inhuman, but instead she's a mutant, which apparently was meant to be the original conception of the character. She wasn't supposed to be an Inhuman, she was supposed to be a mutant, but then Marvel was like, no. So, in a weird way, the MCU is being faithful to the original idea of Kamala Khan, but then also they're not sticking to the comic books, which is interesting. And the thing that I just found kind of funny about that moment was how Bruno was just like, oh my god, there's something wrong with your DNA, something like a mutation, and then they just play the 90s X-Men theme, just like, and it's like, okay, very subtle, but I kind of appreciate it. But to wrap things up, at the end of the day, I liked Ms. Marvel. I just kind of wish that the last 3 episodes were as strong as the first 3 episodes. And I really do hope that we get to see more of this character in the future, not just in the Marvels, but in, say, a Ms. Marvel Season 2 or a Ms. Marvel film, because really like the character, and I really like Iman Vellani as this character, and I just want to see more with her, and I want to see how this character grows. Will she get with Bruno? Will she get with Kamran? I'm invested. I want to see more of her family. I want to see more of the Muslim community. I just want to see more of this world, basically. Like, I thought the creative team did a really good job at executing this character and bringing her to life, and I do want more of this character. But those were just my thoughts on Ms. Marvel. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. Until we meet again, see you guys next time.